Michael Bennett tightened his tie while gazing out the window of his 20th floor office. Washington, D.C. stretched before him, imposing and organized, so different from the confusion dominating his thoughts. His cell phone vibrated on the tempered glass desk. It was Sarah again, the third call that morning. "Michael, I need to talk to you. It's urgent." He took a deep breath before answering. In the 3 years since their divorce, conversations with his ex-wife rarely brought good news. They were always demands, complaints, or requests for increases in child support. The separation had been a painful process for both, but Michael prided himself on keeping his part of the agreement: punctual bank transfers, gifts on important dates, and bi-weekly visits to their daughter. "Sarah, I'm about to go into a meeting. Can it be quick?" On the other end of the line, Sarah's voice sounded different than usual. There was no irritation or impatience, but an almost pleading tone that Michael didn't recognize. "I need to travel urgently to Boston. A family health issue. My mother—" It's complicated to explain over the phone. Michael checked his watch. There were 10 minutes left before the meeting with Japanese investors interested in the new residential complex his company planned to build in Phoenix. "And Emma? Are you taking her with you?" "I can't, Michael. It's a delicate treatment. I'll be in the hospital most of the time." Michael felt a twinge of concern. Emma was only 5 years old and had never been separated from her mother for more than a weekend. "So who's going to look after her? Don't your parents live in Baltimore?" "I've already figured that out," Sarah replied quickly. "I hired a nanny, Melissa Wilson. She has excellent references, has worked with families in the community. Emma has already met her and got along well with her." Michael frowned. He didn't like the idea of leaving his daughter with a stranger, but Sarah had always been organized and cautious, especially when it came to their little girl. "How long will you be gone?" "A few weeks, maybe a month. I'm not sure yet." A month was a long time. Michael consulted his mental calendar. He had trips scheduled to Denver and Miami in the coming weeks, important meetings he couldn't postpone. "I want to meet this nanny," he said finally. "Can I go to Fairfax over the weekend?" "That won't be necessary," Sarah cut him off. "I have to leave tomorrow morning, but don't worry, Melissa is extremely qualified. You can talk to her via video call if you prefer." Something in Sarah's tone of voice bothered him, but he couldn't identify exactly what. Maybe it was just the stress of the situation. "All right, send me her contact information and we'll schedule a call, and please send me updates about yourself." After hanging up, Michael tried to focus on the graphs and spreadsheets on his desk, but his mind wandered to Emma, the curly-haired girl with curious eyes who had inherited his stubborn chin, but her mother's sweet smile. The bi-weekly visits never seemed enough, but he consoled himself by thinking that the quality of time together compensated for the quantity. He took her to parks, children's restaurants, cinemas, always places full of fun and stimulation, where the awkward silence between father and daughter could be filled by external attractions. In the first video call with Melissa Wilson, 2 days later, Michael felt strangely relieved. The woman of approximately 40 had a calm demeanor and a soft voice. She talked about her experience with children, mentioned first aid courses, and was available to establish a routine of calls so he could keep up with Emma. The little girl appeared briefly on the screen, shy as she always was in first interactions, but broke into a smile when she saw her father. She showed a colorful drawing of a house with flowers and a dog they didn't have. "It's our house, Daddy, and this is Rex, who Aunt Melissa said we can have someday." Michael smiled, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest that always accompanied interactions with his daughter, a mixture of love and guilt that he could never fully name. "It's very beautiful, Princess. I miss you. I'll visit you soon, I promise." The first weeks passed without incident. Michael called every day, always at the same time after dinner. Emma appeared on the screen, sometimes excited, sometimes sleepy, but always there. Melissa sent daily photos. Emma at breakfast, playing in the garden, doing homework from preschool. Everything seemed normal. So normal that Michael began to space out the calls. He had a tight schedule, after all. New construction, new projects, new possibilities for expansion to the north of the country. It was in the third week that the first subtle changes began to appear. Emma seemed quieter during calls. Her drawings, which Melissa still sent by email, had lost their vibrant colors. The houses were now gray, the human figures smaller, almost hidden in the corners of the pages. She misses her mother, Melissa justified when Michael commented. It's normal at this age, children express their feelings through art. Michael accepted the explanation, even feeling there was something more. He tried to compensate for Sarah's absence by sending more gifts: a new doll, a children's tablet with educational games, a set of professional paints and brushes that the salesperson guaranteed were suitable for young children. The manager of the toy store already recognized him by sight and always set aside new items to show when he appeared. "You don't need so many gifts, Michael," Melissa commented during one of the calls as Emma unwrapped the third package that week. "Children need presents more than presents." The phrase bothered him, but he swallowed his irritation. Who was she to give lessons on fatherhood? He was doing the best he could, given the circumstances. He ensured that Emma had everything of the best: international school, ballet classes, swimming, English. Her future was secured with robust investments and savings. What more could a child want? It was on a rainy Thursday, during a particularly tense meeting with shareholders, that Michael received the call from the school. The polite but firm voice of the educational coordinator pulled him out of his state of concentration. "Mr. Bennett, I'm sorry to bother you, but we're concerned about Emma. She hasn't attended classes for 3 days, and we haven't received any formal justification." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. He excused himself from those present and left the room to continue the conversation. "What do you mean 3 days? Didn't the nanny provide any explanation? We tried contacting Mrs. Sarah's number and the registered caregiver's cell phone, but we received no response," explained the coordinator. "Since you are the secondary contact, we thought it prudent to inform you." Michael thanked her, hung up, and immediately called Melissa. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. He sent messages that went unanswered. The vague discomfort he had felt in recent weeks crystallized into palpable anxiety. When he finally, hours later, received a response, it was in the form of a short audio with background noise. "Dr. Michael, sorry for not answering earlier. Emma caught a little virus, nothing serious, but I thought it best to keep her at home so as not to infect her classmates. She's sleeping now, much better. She should be back to school normally tomorrow." The explanation was plausible, but something in Melissa's voice sounded different. Less confident, perhaps. Michael tried to convince himself he was being paranoid. After all, children get sick. It's natural for a caregiver to take precautions. Still, he decided he would make a visit over the weekend earlier than planned. He wanted to see Emma in person, confirm that everything was all right. That night he had trouble sleeping. The lights of Washington blinked through the window of his penthouse apartment, but instead of admiring the privileged view, Michael tossed restlessly between the Egyptian cotton sheets. Something was wrong. He could feel it. The same intuition that guided him in business, that had made him build an empire from scratch, was now sounding alarms he couldn't ignore. If you're interested in this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from, and we'll continue. The trip from Washington, D.C. to Richmond took less than 2 hours, but to Michael it seemed like an eternity. He opted for the earliest flight on Saturday morning, leaving behind a pile of unsigned contracts and unanswered emails. His assistant, Matthew, protested when he cancelled 3 important meetings scheduled for Monday. "Family matters," was the only explanation Michael offered, before turning off his corporate cell phone and storing it in his desk drawer. For the first time in years, he felt there was something more urgent than business. During the flight, he tried to contact Melissa again. The messages remained unanswered and calls went straight to voicemail. He tried to reach Sarah too, but the result was the same. This was even stranger. Sarah always answered his calls, especially when it came to matters related to Emma. She must be busy with her mother's treatment, he muttered to himself, trying to push away the growing discomfort. But the justification sounded weak, even to his own ears. From Richmond International Airport, he took a taxi straight to Fairfax. The gated community where Sarah lived with Emma was in an upscale area, surrounded by hills and abundant vegetation. A quiet and safe place, ideal for raising a child. That's what he thought when he agreed that his ex-wife would keep the house after the divorce. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," greeted the security guard, recognizing him immediately. Despite the spaced-out visits, Michael maintained good relationships with the community's employees, always leaving generous tips during the end-of-year holidays. It's been a while since we've seen you around here." "Is Mrs. Sarah home?" Michael asked, trying to maintain a casual tone. The guard quickly consulted the system before answering. "I haven't seen her for a few weeks, sir. I think she's traveling." "And the nanny, Melissa Wilson?" The man frowned, thoughtful. "The lady who was taking care of Emma. I saw her leaving a few days ago with a large suitcase. I thought they were going to meet Mrs. Sarah." Michael's heart raced. Without further questions, he quickly headed for the house. As he approached, he noticed details that seemed out of place. The garden, which Sarah kept impeccable, showed signs of neglect. Mail had accumulated in the mailbox. All the curtains were closed, despite the sunny morning. He knocked on the door forcefully, calling for Emma. Silence. He knocked again, harder. Nothing. With trembling hands, he pulled from his pocket the spare key he had never returned after the separation. Sarah had asked several times, but he always found an excuse to delay. Now he was grateful for his own stubbornness. Upon opening the door, he was greeted by an unpleasant smell of spoiled food and something else he couldn't immediately identify. The house was in shadow and complete disarray. Toys scattered on the floor, clothes thrown over furniture, dirty plates on the living room table. "Emma!" he called, his voice echoing through the empty house. "Emma, it's Daddy!" A subtle noise came from the kitchen. Michael followed the sound, his heart pounding against his chest. That's when he saw her. Emma was sitting on the kitchen floor, leaning against the cabinet under the sink. Her face and hands were dirty, her hair tangled. She wore the same unicorn pajamas that Michael recognized from a video call days ago. In her hand, she held a piece of bread that looked moldy. For a moment, time stopped. Michael couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The scene was so surreal, so absolutely out of the reality he knew, that his brain refused to process it completely. It was Emma who broke the silence. "Daddy," she murmured, her voice small and hoarse, as if she hadn't spoken for days. "You came." Michael knelt beside his daughter, taking her in his arms. She was lighter than he remembered, her small body trembling slightly against his. He felt hot tears streaming down his own face as he held her tightly, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. "What happened, Princess?" "Where is Aunt Melissa?" Emma pressed her face against his chest. Before answering, she left. She said she was going to buy ice cream, but she didn't come back. The simplicity of the answer, the innocence with which it was said, made Michael's stomach turn. How long had his daughter been alone? Days, judging by the state of the house and the child herself. How had this happened? How could Melissa abandon a 5-year-old child? And then, an even more disturbing question arose in his mind. Where was Sarah during all this time? Without letting go of Emma, he picked up his phone and called emergency services. The operator, with a calm and professional voice, instructed him to check if the child showed signs of dehydration or other evident problems. Michael described the situation with a trembling voice, trying to maintain composure so as not to frighten his daughter even more. "An ambulance is on the way, sir," the woman informed. "Continue talking to the child. Offer water if she accepts, but in small quantities." While waiting, Michael took Emma to the bathroom. Carefully, he washed her face and hands with warm water, murmuring words of comfort. The girl was frightened, but seemed relieved to no longer be alone. She accepted a few sips of water that her father offered. "I'm hungry, Daddy," she said softly. These simple words were like a dagger to Michael's heart. His daughter, his own daughter, going hungry while he signed million-dollar contracts and dined at starred restaurants. "We'll eat something delicious as soon as the doctor examines you, Princess. I promise." The ambulance arrived in less than 15 minutes. The paramedics examined Emma with professional efficiency. While Michael answered questions about the situation, they recommended taking her to the hospital for a more complete evaluation, considering the state of possible malnutrition and dehydration. At the hospital, while Emma was being attended to, Michael finally managed to organize his thoughts. He called his lawyer, Robert Fisher, who besides being his legal representative was one of the few friends he had kept, after years dedicated exclusively to work. "I need your help, Robert. It's an emergency." The lawyer, sensing the gravity in his friend's voice, didn't ask questions. "I'm on my way." Michael also tried to contact Sarah again. The phone remained off. He sent messages, emails, but nothing. His ex-wife's absence was becoming increasingly inexplicable and concerning. While waiting for Emma's test results, a nurse approached with a form. You're the father, correct? We need some information for the records. Michael nodded mechanically and began to fill out the document. Full name, date of birth, address. Basic details that any father should know by heart. But when he reached the field about allergies and pre-existing medical conditions, his hand stopped. He realized, with a twinge of shame, that he didn't know the answer. Does Emma have any food allergies? He asked the nurse, who looked at him with an expression difficult to decipher. According to the system, she's allergic to shellfish and has lactose intolerance, the woman replied, consulting the tablet. It's all in her history. Mrs. Sarah always brings this information updated to routine consultations. Michael felt his face burn. Of course Emma had allergies. How had he never known this? How many other essential things about his own daughter did he not know? The doctor who attended Emma, Dr. Thomas Parker, had kind eyes that contrasted with the seriousness of his expression as he talked with Michael in the hallway while the girl rested in the room. Physically, she'll be fine, assured the doctor. There are signs of mild dehydration, and she's a bit below the ideal weight, but nothing that a few days of proper nutrition and care won't resolve. Michael let out a sigh of relief. However, continued Dr. Parker, his tone now more grave, the psychological impact of having been abandoned cannot be underestimated. I strongly recommend psychological counseling as soon as she is more physically recovered. Michael nodded, guilt weighing on his shoulders like a ton of concrete. How had he not realized earlier that something was wrong? How could he have so easily accepted Melissa's excuses about a virus, internet problems, Emma being asleep during calls? The signs were there and he had ignored them, too busy with meetings and negotiations. Can I take her home today? He asked, anxious to start repairing his mistake, to be present as he had never been before. I'd prefer to keep her under observation until tomorrow, replied the doctor, but you can stay with her in the room. Back in the room he found Emma sleeping peacefully. He pulled up a chair next to the bed and sat down, observing his daughter's delicate face. He remembered the day she was born, how he had held that small bundle in his arms, silently promising to protect her from all harm. How had he failed so completely in that promise? His cell phone vibrated. It was Robert, informing that he was at the hospital reception. Michael asked the nurse to keep an eye on Emma for a few minutes and went to meet the lawyer. Robert Fisher was waiting in the hospital reception with the grave expression that Michael knew well from complicated legal proceedings. Tall, broad-shouldered, with grey hair at the temples, the lawyer conveyed a natural authority that usually intimidated opponents in court. Today, however, his gaze revealed only genuine concern. How is she? Was the first question he asked, dispensing with formalities. Physically, she'll be fine, Michael replied, repeating the doctor's words. But she was abandoned, Robert, left alone for days. The lawyer shook his head, incredulous. And Sarah? Were you able to talk to her? Nothing. Phone off. No response to messages or emails. Robert indicated a more secluded corner of the lobby, and they both sat down in synthetic leather armchairs. Tell me everything from the beginning. Michael recounted the conversation with Sarah about the supposed trip for her mother's treatment, hiring Melissa, the video calls that became more sparse, the subtle signs he had ignored. As he spoke, he realized how obvious the clues had been, how blind he had been by trusting that everything was under control while sending money and gifts from a distance. We need to notify the authorities, said Robert after hearing the entire account. Abandonment of a dependent is a crime, and we need to locate Sarah urgently. The word crime made Michael shudder. He had never imagined being involved in such a situation, much less with his own daughter as the victim. Do you believe Sarah knew that she participated in this? The question hung in the air, loaded with painful implications. As difficult as the relationship with his ex-wife was, Michael couldn't conceive that she would deliberately put her own daughter at risk. I can't jump to conclusions, Robert replied cautiously. But it's strange that she's been uncontactable for so long, especially being the mother of a young child. At that moment, Michael's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. Mr. Michael, this is Nancy, Sarah's neighbor. I heard you're in town and I'm concerned. I haven't seen Sarah for weeks, but yesterday I noticed an unfamiliar car parked in front of the house. If you can call me, I have more information. Michael showed the message to Robert, who immediately took out his own phone. I'm going to contact a trusted private investigator. Meanwhile, talk to this neighbor. Any information could be useful right now. Michael returned to Emma's room before making the call. The girl was still sleeping, her face serene in contrast to the tumult of the last few days. He gently caressed her curly hair and went out into the hallway, where he could speak without disturbing her. Nancy answered on the first ring, as if she had been anxiously waiting for the call. "Mr. Michael, I'm glad you called. I'm very worried about Sarah and Emma. Mrs. Nancy, I found Emma alone at home today. Do you know anything that might help me understand what happened?" There was a sigh on the other end of the line. "I suspected something like this might happen. Sarah wasn't well in the last weeks before she disappeared. She seemed nervous, anxious. She even mentioned to me that she was having serious financial problems." Michael frowned, confused. "Financial problems? That doesn't make sense. I pay generous child support, well above what the law requires, and Sarah has her own job at the architecture firm." "I don't know details, Doctor, but she mentioned something about investments gone wrong. And then suddenly this Melissa appeared, saying she would take care of Emma while Sarah traveled. I found it strange at the time, but Sarah assured me everything was fine." The pieces were starting to fit together, forming an even more disturbing picture than Michael had initially imagined. "And the car you saw yesterday? A black sedan. I had never seen it before. A man got out, looked around, and left shortly after. He seemed to be observing the house." Michael thanked her for the information and hung up, feeling a chill run down his spine. Something much more complex was happening, something that went beyond simple abandonment by an irresponsible nanny. When he returned to the room, Emma was awake, looking around with frightened eyes. "Daddy!" she called with a trembling voice as soon as she saw him. Michael rushed to her side, holding her small hand between his. "I'm here, Princess. I'm not going anywhere." He sat on the edge of the bed, trying to find simple words to explain the situation to a 5-year-old child. "Emma, can you tell me what happened while Mommy was traveling? When was the last time you saw Aunt Melissa?" The girl bit her lower lip, thoughtful. "Aunt Melissa got mad at the phone. She talked loudly, said bad words." "When was this, Emma?" "Many days ago. She said she was going to buy chocolate ice cream for me, that I should be good and wait, but she didn't come back." Michael felt his heart tighten. "And you stayed alone all this time?" Emma nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "I was afraid of the window man." Michael froze. "What man, Emma?" "The bearded man. He looked through the living room window at night. He said if I wasn't quiet, he would take me away." A cold shiver ran down Michael's spine. The neighbor's information about the unfamiliar car took on an even more sinister meaning. "Did you see his face, Princess?" Emma shook her head negatively. "It was dark. He only appeared when the lights were off." Michael hugged his daughter tightly, trying to control the tremor in his hands. Someone had been watching the house, intimidating a small, defenseless child. The idea was so absurd, so monstrous, that he could barely process it. The door to the room opened, and Robert entered, accompanied by a middle-aged woman with a professional posture. "Michael, this is Dr. Jennifer Hayes, a child psychologist. I thought it would be important to have a specialist to talk with Emma." The doctor approached with a gentle smile. "Hello, Emma. May I sit here with you for a little while?" The girl looked at her father, seeking approval. Michael nodded, encouraging her. "I'll be right outside, Princess. Dr. Jennifer just wants to talk a bit, okay?" Emma agreed timidly, and Michael left the room with Robert. "My investigator is already working," the lawyer informed as soon as they were alone in the hallway. "Checking Melissa Wilson's background, trying to locate Sarah, looking into recent financial movements." "Emma mentioned a man who watched her through the window at night," Michael recounted, his voice trembling with contained anger. "He threatened to take her if she didn't stay quiet." Robert paled. "That changes everything. We're not just dealing with an irresponsible nanny, but possibly with something more organized. What are you suggesting?" "I don't want to speculate without concrete evidence," the lawyer replied cautiously. "But considering what the neighbor said about Sarah's financial problems, and now this mysterious man, we need to be very careful." Michael ran his hands over his face, trying to organize his thoughts. "What do we do now?" "For now, ensuring Emma's safety is the priority. I suggest not returning to the house in Fairfax. I have an unoccupied apartment in downtown Richmond that you can use temporarily." "And what about Sarah?" "We'll continue looking, of course, but Michael—" Robert hesitated before continuing. We need to consider the possibility that she's involved in this situation in some way. The idea was too painful to accept. Sarah might have her flaws, but abandoning her own daughter, deliberately putting her at risk. It seemed inconceivable. Before he could respond, the door to the room opened and Dr. Hayes came out, her professional face revealing little about the conversation she had had with Emma. She's exhausted, but emotionally more stable than I would expect, considering the circumstances, the psychologist informed. Children have surprising resilience, but that doesn't diminish the trauma. We'll need regular sessions to process what happened. Did she say anything about the window man? Michael asked anxiously. Dr. Hayes nodded, her gaze becoming more serious. Yes, and that particularly concerns me. From the description, it doesn't seem to be a childish invention or a nightmare. Emma provided consistent details. A man with a dark beard, who always appeared at the same time for 3 consecutive nights. Michael felt his blood freeze. Did she say anything about her mother? About Sarah? Emma believes her mother is traveling, as she was told. She mentioned that Mommy was going to get medicine for sick grandma. That seems to be the explanation given to her. As they were talking, Robert's cell phone vibrated. He checked the message, and his face changed. I have news, he said in a low voice, stepping away a few paces so as not to be heard by other patients or hospital staff. My investigator found something about Melissa Wilson. Michael and Dr. Hayes approached, attentive. The SSN she provided in the contract that Sarah signed belongs to a woman who died 3 years ago. The previous work references are false. None of the listed families exist at the addresses provided. So she used fake documents? Michael asked, incredulous. Exactly. And there's more. The community's security cameras recorded her leaving last Tuesday, with a large suitcase, as the neighbor mentioned. But the most interesting thing is that she didn't leave alone. Michael held his breath. She was with someone else? Robert hesitated, as if weighing his words. She was with Sarah, Michael. The two left together, in the same car. The world seemed to slow down around Michael. The revelation was so unexpected, so absolutely contrary to everything he believed about his daughter's mother, that for a moment he couldn't formulate any response. This doesn't make sense, he finally muttered. Sarah would never abandon Emma. There must be some mistake. The images are clear, insisted Robert. The investigator is sending them to my email now. I can show you. Michael shook his head, refusing to see. If this is true, why? Why would Sarah do something like this? It was Dr. Hayes who answered, her voice calm and professional. People can act in surprising ways when under extreme pressure. If Sarah was really facing serious financial problems, as the neighbor suggested, she may have panicked. I'm not justifying it, just trying to understand. Michael turned to the door of the room where Emma was resting, unaware of the devastating revelations about her mother. What will I tell her? How do I explain that she was abandoned by her own mother? Dr. Hayes placed a hand on his shoulder in a gesture of support. For now, nothing. She's already been through enough trauma. When she's more physically recovered and emotionally more stable, we can work together to help her process this information in a way appropriate to her age. Michael nodded, grateful for the professional guidance. He turned to Robert. We need to find Sarah and understand what really happened, and we need to ensure that Emma is safe. As for the man who was observing the house, Robert began. One thing at a time, interrupted Michael, feeling the weight of the emotional exhaustion of the last few hours. I'll stay with Emma tonight. Tomorrow, when she's discharged, I'll accept your offer of the apartment, and then we'll begin to unravel this mystery step by step. The lawyer agreed, putting his cell phone in his pocket. I'll stay nearby in case you need anything, and I've already requested reinforced security at the hospital, just as a precaution. When Robert and Dr. Hayes left, Michael returned to the room. Emma was sleeping again, her face serene in contrast to the whirlwind that now defined their lives. He sat in the armchair next to the bed, observing the gentle rise and fall of her chest. One certainty crystallized in his mind. From that moment on, nothing would be more important than his daughter. Not business, not money, not the empire he had built with such effort. It was time to be the father that Emma deserved. Present, attentive, protective. A real father, not just a distant provider. The apartment offered by Robert was smaller than Michael's mansion in Washington, D.C., or Sarah's house in Fairfax, but still spacious and comfortable. Located in a building with reinforced security in downtown Richmond, it offered the discretion and protection they needed at that moment. Emma timidly explored the new environment, dragging along the worn teddy bear that Michael had hastily purchased at a convenience store in the hospital. It was strange, he thought, that among so many expensive toys he had sent over the years, his daughter didn't have a simple teddy bear for comfort. "Do you like it here, Princess?" he asked. Watching her examine the view from the living room window, Emma nodded without much enthusiasm. Since leaving the hospital, she had been quiet, as if still processing everything that had happened. "When will we see Mommy?" she asked suddenly, turning to face him. Michael felt a lump in his throat. Following Dr. Hayes's advice, they had explained to Emma that her mother needed to extend her trip, and that she would stay with her father for now. A half-truth that seemed less harmful than the reality. "We don't know yet, Princess, but I'm here with you, and we'll do fun things together, okay?" The girl looked back out the window, her small face reflecting an understanding that went beyond her 5 years. "Aunt Melissa also said she would come back soon," she murmured almost to herself. The comment hit Michael like a punch to the stomach. His daughter's trust had been betrayed so brutally that he could hardly imagine how to restore it. "I will never leave you, Emma," he said firmly, kneeling to be at the level of her eyes. "I promise." The girl stared at him for a long moment, as if assessing the sincerity of his words. Finally, she nodded and turned her attention back to the bear. "He needs a name," she said. "Why don't you choose?" "I think I'll call him Steady," she replied after thinking for a bit. Michael smiled, intrigued by the unusual choice. "Steady? Why?" "Because he stays steady when I'm scared," explained Emma with the profound simplicity that only children possess. In the days that followed, Michael established a new routine. For the first time in his life as a businessman, he delegated responsibilities, cancelled commitments, and informed the board that he would work remotely for an indefinite period. Matthew, his assistant, seemed not to believe when he received the instructions. "Are you sure, sir? The negotiation with the Japanese is at a crucial stage." "I'm absolutely sure," Michael replied without hesitation. "My daughter needs me now. The rest can wait." With Robert's help, he found a nearby school that could temporarily receive Emma. He also scheduled regular consultations with Dr. Hayes, both for the girl and for himself. After all, he also needed to learn to deal with his own emotions and build parenting skills he had never fully developed. Between therapy sessions, medical consultations to ensure Emma's complete physical recovery, and adaptation to the new school, Michael discovered something he had never expected. He was enjoying being a full-time father. The small routines, preparing breakfast, combing his daughter's rebellious hair, reading stories before bedtime, brought a satisfaction that no million-dollar contract had ever provided. "You're different," commented Dr. Hayes during an individual session 2 weeks after the incident. "More present, more connected." Michael reflected on the observation. "I think I had never really known my daughter before," he admitted. "I spent more time thinking about her future, investments, savings, college, than living in the present with her." The psychologist smiled, making some notes. "It's a valuable insight. Many parents, especially those with demanding careers, fall into the trap of confusing material provision with emotional presence." "That's exactly what I did," agreed Michael, remembering the countless times he had compensated for his absence with expensive gifts. "I thought I was doing enough because I ensured financial comfort, but when I found Emma alone in that kitchen—" His voice failed, the image still painfully vivid in his memory. "What did you feel at that moment?" Dr. Hayes asked softly. "Anger. At Melissa, at Sarah, but mainly at myself, because deep down I also abandoned her, just in a different, more socially acceptable way." While Michael worked on his emotional issues, Emma also showed progress. Gradually, she returned to being a more talkative and curious child. The nightmares about the window man became less frequent, although she still occasionally woke up crying. On one of those nights, when Michael was calming her after a bad dream, Emma asked a question that caught him off guard. "Daddy, why don't you and Mommy live together anymore?" Sitting on the edge of the bed, Michael carefully considered how to respond. It would be easy to blame Sarah, especially considering recent events, but something inside him, Perhaps the sessions with Dr. Hayes, perhaps the new perspective he was developing, prevented him. Sometimes, Princess, people who loved each other very much discover they can no longer live together. Not because they stopped caring, but because they have different ways of seeing life. "Is that why you left?" insisted Emma. The question hit Michael squarely. In the narrative he had constructed for himself, it was Sarah who had pushed him away, with her constant demands and criticisms. But for the first time, he considered the situation from his daughter's angle. For her, he had simply disappeared from day-to-day life. "I should have stayed closer to you," he finally replied. "Even not living in the same house as Mommy, I could have been more present in your life, and I promise that now it will be different." Emma seemed satisfied with the answer. She hugged Steady tightly and closed her eyes, quickly falling back asleep. Michael remained there watching her, thinking about how a 5-year-old child had managed to expose with such clarity what years of therapy might not achieve. The next morning, while preparing pancakes for breakfast, a newly discovered skill thanks to online tutorials, Michael received a call from Robert. "We have news," announced the lawyer without preamble, "and it's big." "About Sarah?" "Yes, and about Melissa too. Can we meet after you drop Emma off at school?" 2 hours later, Michael entered the law office in downtown Richmond. Robert wasn't alone. Beside him, a middle-aged man with the appearance of a retired police officer stood up to greet him. "This is Steve Morris, the private investigator I hired," introduced Robert. "He has important information." Michael shook the man's hand and sat down, anxious. "What did you find out?" Steve opened a folder with documents and photos. "First about Melissa Wilson. Her real name is Melissa Oliver. She has a police record for fraud and identity theft. She usually approaches wealthy families, gains their trust, and then pulls scams." Michael nodded, not particularly surprised by this information. "And what about Sarah? Did you find her?" Steve and Robert exchanged glances. "Yes," replied the investigator, "but the situation is complicated." He slid a photograph across the table. It showed Sarah entering a modest hotel on the outskirts of Boston, accompanied by a man Michael didn't recognize. "Who is he?" "Andrew Oliver, known as Drew. Melissa's brother and a known figure in the underworld of illegal gambling and loan sharking." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. "Is Sarah being held against her will?" he asked, trying to find some explanation that wouldn't incriminate his daughter's mother. Steve shook his head. "It doesn't appear to be the case. From our observation, she is with him voluntarily, although she seems nervous and apprehensive the few times she leaves the room." Michael couldn't fully process what he was hearing. The idea that Sarah, an apparently dedicated mother, could abandon her own daughter to run away with a criminal was simply inconceivable. But why? It doesn't make sense. It was Robert who answered, his voice grave. "I think we may have an explanation. I checked Sarah's finances over the last few months, with judicial authorization, considering Emma's abandonment. We discovered suspicious financial movements, frequent withdrawals of large amounts, loans from dubious institutions. She was having financial problems, as the neighbor mentioned," concluded Michael. "Yes, but they weren't common problems," continued Robert. "From the pattern of movements, it seems that Sarah was involved with gambling, high-value bets repeatedly." The revelation fell like a bomb. Michael had never suspected that Sarah had this kind of problem. During their marriage, she had always been extremely organized with money, even critical of expenditures she considered excessive on his part. "We believe she became indebted to Andrew's group," explained Steve, "and when the situation became unsustainable, Melissa was inserted into the family as part of a plan to extract money from you." "From me? How?" "We think the original plan might have involved some kind of extortion using Emma," replied the investigator carefully. "The window man your daughter mentioned was probably Andrew, preparing the ground for the next step." Michael felt his stomach turn at the idea that his daughter could have been used as a blackmail instrument. But then why abandon her? Why didn't Melissa just follow through with the plan? "That's still not clear," admitted Steve. "But our theory is that something went wrong. Maybe Melissa realized you were suspicious, or maybe Sarah decided to flee directly with Andrew when the situation began to spiral out of control, and they left Emma behind," murmured Michael, anger growing in his chest. "They left a 5-year-old child alone without food, without care." The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with indignation shared by the three men. "What do we do now?" Michael finally asked. "We've already communicated with the authorities," replied Robert. "The Boston police should approach the hotel today. Sarah will be detained for abandonment of a dependent, and Andrew will probably face charges related to participation in the scheme." Michael nodded, a confused mixture of emotions dominating his thoughts. On one hand, he wanted justice for the suffering caused to Emma. On the other, he knew that Sarah's arrest would have a devastating impact on their daughter. And what about Emma? How will we tell her? "Dr. Hayes can guide us on the best approach," suggested Robert, "but I believe that, for now, maintaining the version of the extended trip is most appropriate until the situation stabilizes." Michael agreed, grateful for his friend's sensibility. As he left the office, he felt an enormous weight on his shoulders. The revelations of that day would forever change the course of their lives. Emma would lose, in a way, both parents, Sarah physically and the image she had of her. While driving to pick up his daughter from school, Michael thought about the irony of the situation. For years, he had judged himself an adequate father because he provided financial security. Now he realized that the money he was so proud of providing had become, indirectly, the root of the entire tragedy. Sarah's problems with gambling, her association with Andrew, Emma's abandonment, all linked somehow to financial issues. Emma was waiting for him in the schoolyard, chatting animatedly with a new classmate. Seeing him, her face lit up, and she ran in his direction. "Daddy, I made a drawing today. Want to see?" Michael knelt to hug her, feeling tears in his eyes that he quickly disguised. "Of course I do, Princess. Let's go home and you can show me, okay?" On the way back to the apartment, while Emma chatted about her new teacher and the friends she was making, Michael made a silent promise to himself. Regardless of what happened with Sarah, he would be the father that Emma deserved. Not just in material aspects, but in presence, affection, and guidance. The security she needed now went far beyond bank accounts and investments. It was the security of knowing she would never be abandoned again. If you're interested in this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from, and we'll continue. Michael never imagined he would be in that situation, sitting in a cold and impersonal visiting room, waiting to meet his ex-wife in a women's detention center. The grey walls, the uncomfortable plastic chairs, the vigilant gaze of the officers, everything contributed to intensify the sense of unreality that had accompanied him since Robert called informing him about Sarah's arrest. The operation in Boston had occurred without incident. Sarah had not resisted the police approach, apparently relieved that everything was ending. Andrew had tried to escape through the back of the hotel, but was detained. With him, they found fake documents, including a passport in Sarah's name with a destination marked for Paraguay. "She asked to speak with you," Robert had explained on the phone. "It's your decision whether to go or not." Michael had reflected at length before accepting, not for Sarah, whom he barely recognized now, but for Emma. He needed to understand, to hear from his ex-wife's own mouth, how she had been capable of abandoning their daughter. The metal door opened with a creak, and Sarah entered, escorted by a correctional officer. Michael almost didn't recognize her. Her brown hair, always impeccably arranged, was tied in a sloppy ponytail. Her face, without makeup, showed deep circles under her eyes and an unhealthy pallor. But the most impressive thing was her gaze, empty, defeated, so different from the determined woman he had been married to. "Thank you for coming," she said in a low voice, sitting across from him. Michael didn't immediately respond, studying the face of the woman he had once loved, with whom he had built dreams, with whom he had had a child. The anger he expected to feel was there, but mixed with something he hadn't anticipated. Pity. "Why, Sarah?" he finally asked, his voice controlled. "How could you abandon Emma?" Sarah lowered her eyes, her hands restless on the table. "It was never my intention to leave her alone," she murmured. "Melissa was supposed to stay with her until we resolved some things." "Resolved some things," repeated Michael, incredulity raising his tone. "What kind of mother leaves a 5-year-old child with a stranger to resolve some things?" Sarah flinched as if she had been slapped. "You don't understand. I was desperate." "Then make me understand. Explain how a supposedly dedicated mother abandons her own daughter to run away with a loan shark." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "It started with small bets after the divorce. Nothing serious. An online poker site, some scratch cards. It was a way to deal with the loneliness. with the pressure of raising Emma practically alone. Michael contained the acidic response that came to his mind. He had never realized that Sarah felt lonely or overwhelmed. In his view, he was fulfilling his part by sending money and visiting Emma periodically. At some point, I lost control, she continued. I started betting larger amounts, trying to recover what I was losing. That's when I met Andrew at an underground casino. He offered loans, said I could pay when my luck turned around. The story was so predictable, so sadly common, that Michael felt a twinge of guilt for not having noticed the signs. Why didn't you ask for help? Why didn't you talk to me? Sarah gave a bitter laugh. Talk to you? When was the last time we really talked, Michael? Not about money or visitation schedules, but a real conversation. The question hit him like a punch. She was right. Since the divorce, their interactions were purely transactional. He transferred money. She took care of Emma. Both went on with their separate lives. Still, nothing justifies what you did, he retorted, regaining focus. Emma was alone for days. Something much worse could have happened. I know, whispered Sarah, tears now flowing freely. I will never forgive myself for that. Melissa promised she would stay with her until I resolved the debts with Andrew. The plan was to use some of the child support to calm him down, buy time. And then run away with him to Paraguay? Sarah seemed surprised. No, I never. It was his idea. He said we needed to disappear for a while until things cooled down. I was confused, afraid. When I realized what was really happening, it was too late. Michael wanted to believe, wanted to find some redemption in Sarah's story that would make everything less terrible. But the evidence was clear. You left Emma behind, alone. A 5-year-old child. Melissa swore she would return, that it was just for a few hours while she resolved some details, insisted Sarah, desperate. When I found out she had abandoned Emma, I wanted to return immediately, but Andrew, he wouldn't let me. He said I was already too compromised, that we would lose everything if we went back. And you chose him over your daughter. Sarah covered her face with her hands, sobbing. I was terrified, Michael. Andrew has contacts, dangerous people. He said if I didn't cooperate, if I tried to run away or report him, Emma would suffer the consequences. Michael froze. He threatened Emma? Not directly, not in those words, but he made it clear that he knew where she went to school, who her friends were. He said he had eyes everywhere. The window man that Emma had mentioned. Andrew had been watching the house, intimidating a small child. The idea made Michael's blood boil. You should have gone to the police immediately. And you think I didn't consider that? Sarah retorted, a flash of her old strength in her voice. But I was afraid of what he might do before the authorities detained him. I thought if I cooperated, I would buy time, find a way to protect Emma. Michael shook his head, incredulous. You left her unprotected, Sarah. If I hadn't shown up that Saturday... He didn't complete the sentence. The possibility was too painful to consider. How is she? Sarah asked after a moment of heavy silence. Physically, well, recovered. Emotionally, she misses you. She thinks you're traveling for work. Sarah nodded, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. That's better that way. She doesn't need to know this. For the first time, Michael agreed with his ex-wife. Dr. Hayes thinks that, with time, we can introduce a version of the truth appropriate to her age. But for now, we're maintaining the story of the trip. You hired a psychologist for her, that's good. The observation carried an implicit recognition that Michael was finally taking an active role in his daughter's life. I'm learning to be a real father, he admitted, not just a provider. Sarah looked at him with an expression that mixed sadness and something close to relief. Emma always needed your presence more than your presence, Michael. Perhaps that's the only good thing in this whole situation. You'll finally have the chance to really get to know each other. The correctional officer approached, indicating that time was running out. What happens now? Asked Michael, standing up. My lawyer is trying to reach a deal. I collaborated with all the information about Andrew and his network, which might reduce my sentence. Sarah paused, hesitant. I would like to see Emma when possible. Michael felt divided. On one hand, the idea of Emma visiting her mother in a prison environment was disturbing. On the other, he knew that the girl needed this connection, even under such difficult circumstances. I'll talk to Dr. Hayes about this, he finally replied. If she thinks Emma is ready, we'll consider the possibility. It was the most he could offer at the moment, and Sarah seemed to understand. She nodded in silence, one last request before the officer escorted her out. "Tell her that Mommy loves her very much. That I never stopped loving her." Michael left the detention center with conflicting feelings. The anger remained, but now mixed with a more complex understanding of the situation. Sarah wasn't a monster who had coldly abandoned her daughter. She was a woman who had made terribly wrong choices, driven by weaknesses and circumstances he had never suspected. On the way back to the apartment where Emma was waiting with the babysitter, an elderly lady personally recommended by Dr. Hayes with rigorously verified credentials, Michael reflected on how much they had both failed as parents, Sarah in a more dramatic and visible way, he in a more subtle and socially acceptable manner, but no less harmful. Emma greeted him with a tight hug and a new drawing, a family of 3 people, a curly-haired girl in the middle, a tall man on one side, a woman on the other. All smiling, all holding hands. "It's us," she explained proudly. "You, me, and Mommy." Michael felt a lump in his throat. How to explain to a child that the happy family in the drawing no longer existed, that perhaps it had never really existed? "It's very beautiful, Princess," was all he could say, hugging her again. That night, after putting Emma to bed, Michael called Robert. He needed to make important decisions about the future. "How was the meeting with Sarah?" asked the lawyer. "Enlightening and painful." Michael paused. "I need your help with some legal matters." "I'm listening." "I want permanent custody of Emma, and I want to know what the chances are of Andrew getting out of prison earlier than expected." "Custody shouldn't be a problem considering the circumstances," replied Robert. "As for Andrew, he has a record and the charges are serious. But the system has flaws, as we know." Michael nodded, even knowing that his friend couldn't see him through the phone. "I'm going to move permanently to Richmond," he decided. "Emma is adapting well here. She has school, therapy, and I can manage the business from a distance with occasional trips." "It's a good decision," approved Robert. "But what about your house in DC, the company's central offices?" "Some things have lost their importance," Michael replied simply. "Matthew is doing an excellent job as interim director. Maybe it's time to promote him officially." The idea of stepping away from the daily operation of the company he had built from scratch would have been unthinkable months ago. But now, looking at the room where Emma slept peacefully, it seemed the most natural choice in the world. "We'll file the custody papers tomorrow," promised Robert. After hanging up, Michael stood on the apartment balcony, observing the city lights. Richmond was so different from Washington, D.C., less planned, more chaotic, with its winding streets following the contour of the hills. Perhaps it was a good place to start over, to build something more genuine with his daughter. The phone vibrated again, a message from Steve, the investigator. "We found something at Andrew's house that you need to see. Documents, photos. It seems the plan was bigger than we thought. Can we talk tomorrow?" Michael responded affirmatively, a new discomfort settling in his chest. When would all this end? When could Emma finally have the peace and normalcy she deserved? From inside the apartment, he heard a small moan. Emma was having another nightmare. He put his cell phone in his pocket and quickly went to her room. Upon entering, he found her sitting on the bed, hugging steady, her eyes wide in the dark. "The window man came back in my dream, Daddy," she whispered. Michael sat beside her, hugging her tightly. "It was just a dream, Princess. No one is going to hurt you. I'm here." As he rocked her back to sleep, Michael made a silent promise. No matter what tomorrow's discoveries revealed, no matter how complex the situation became, Emma would never again be exposed to fear or abandonment. Not by Sarah, not by Andrew, not by himself. The road to recovery would be long. There would be difficult explanations, adaptations, moments of pain. But there was also hope. Each day, Emma smiled a little more. Each night, the nightmares were a little less frequent. And Michael, for the first time in his life, felt that he was exactly where he should be. Not in a meeting room closing million-dollar deals, but beside a small bed, watching over his daughter's sleep. 6 months can change an entire life. Michael reflected on this truth as he watched Emma playing in the garden of the new house. The property, located in a quiet neighborhood in the West End of Richmond, didn't have the opulence of his former mansion in Washington, D.C., nor the exaggerated dimensions he had once considered necessary to demonstrate his success. It was a medium-sized house, welcoming, with a large garden where Emma could run, and a converted studio from where he managed his business remotely. Steady, the teddy bear that never left the girl's side, now had company. A real dog, a loving mutt rescued from a shelter, which Emma had named Popcorn because of the white spots scattered throughout his caramel fur. The animal ran after the ball that the girl threw, barking happily. "She's happy," commented Dr. Hayes, who had accepted the invitation for coffee that sunny Sunday afternoon. "You also seem lighter." Michael smiled, agreeing. Gradually, they had established a new normality. The permanent custody of Emma had been granted without contestation, and he had reorganized his professional life to prioritize fatherhood. Matthew had officially assumed the executive direction of the construction company, while Michael remained as chairman of the board, participating in strategic decisions without the daily involvement that previously consumed all his time. "The therapy sessions are helping a lot," he replied, observing his daughter. "Both hers and mine." Dr. Hayes nodded, taking a sip of coffee. "Emma is an incredibly resilient child. The way she has processed the events of the last few months, how she has adapted her understanding of family and security, it's admirable." The events of the last few months included revelations that Michael would have preferred to avoid. The investigations into Andrew brought to light a much broader scheme than initially suspected. The man wasn't just a local loan shark, but part of an organized network that exploited people indebted by gambling addiction, often manipulating them to participate in fraudulent schemes. Sarah, as Michael had discovered in the painful subsequent visits to the detention center, had been simultaneously victim and accomplice. Manipulated by her financial and emotional vulnerability, she had ended up involved more deeply than she had initially admitted. "Do you think it's time," Michael asked, returning to the present, "to take Emma to see her mother?" It was a question he had been postponing for months, debating internally and in therapy sessions. Part of him wanted to protect his daughter from any contact with the prison environment, from confronting her with the reality of what had happened to Sarah. Another part understood that, despite everything, the bond between mother and daughter couldn't simply be erased. "I believe so," replied Dr. Hayes after a moment of reflection. "Emma has already partially elaborated the abandonment through the adapted stories we've told. She understands within her current cognitive capacity that her mother did something wrong and is in a place where she needs to think about it. The visit can help her connect these abstract ideas with reality." Michael nodded, still hesitant. "I'm afraid of her reaction, of the emotional impact." "It's natural that you are, and it demonstrates how you've evolved as a father," smiled the psychologist. "But remember, completely avoiding contact also has consequences. Emma needs to process what happened in her own way with adequate support, and Sarah, despite her very serious mistakes, continues to be her mother." The conversation was interrupted by Emma, who came running to them with popcorn at her heels. "Daddy, can I have ice cream? It's hot." Michael smiled, stroking his daughter's curly hair. "Of course, Princess. There's chocolate in the refrigerator." "With caramel topping?" she asked, her eyes shining in anticipation. "With caramel topping," he confirmed, feigning seriousness. "But just one scoop, we're close to lunchtime." Emma ran into the house, faithfully followed by the dog. Michael observed her with a mixture of love and concern. "She seems so normal," he commented. "Sometimes I wonder if she really understands what happened." "Children process trauma differently than adults," explained Dr. Hayes. "They don't have the same capacity for emotional sustenance, so they go back and forth between awareness of what occurred and moments of apparent normality. It's a protection mechanism, not a sign that they've forgotten or overcome it." "The nightmares have decreased," observed Michael. "It's been almost a month since she woke up crying." "That's excellent progress. But remember that trauma can resurface in moments of stress or transition. The visit to Sarah, for example, may trigger some temporary regressive behaviors." Michael considered the information, trying to mentally prepare for what was to come. 2 days later, he and Emma were on their way to the women's detention center, where Sarah was serving her sentence. The girl had been carefully prepared by Dr. Hayes, who had explained with language appropriate for her age what she would see and how the meeting would be. "Are we going to see Mommy today?" asked Emma from the back seat of the car, hugging Steady. "Yes, Princess. Remember what we talked about? Mommy is in a place where adults who did wrong things need to stay for a while. to learn to make better choices. Emma nodded with seriousness. Like when I was grounded for drawing on the wall. Michael smiled at the innocent comparison. Something like that, but for adults and for a longer time. And then she comes back home? The question caught Michael off guard, although he knew it would eventually come. Not to our home, Princess, but one day when her time there is finished, Mommy will be able to live in her own house again, and you can visit her whenever you want. Emma seemed to process the information, her small face assuming a thoughtful expression that made her look much older than her recently turned 6 years. And the bad man who looked through the window? Michael felt a tightness in his chest. Despite all the therapy sessions, Emma still associated Andrew, the window man, with her deepest fears. He's in another place, far from here, where he can't hurt anyone, and he'll stay there for a very, very long time. The answer seemed to satisfy her. She turned her attention to Steady, whispering something in the bear's ear that Michael couldn't hear. The detention center, despite obvious attempts to make the visiting area less intimidating, remained an austere environment. Michael felt Emma squeeze his hand tightly as they went through the security procedures. The family visiting room had some worn toys in a corner, colorful posters on the walls, an attempt to create a less traumatic space for children. When Sarah entered, Michael noticed significant changes. She looked healthier, her gaze less defeated. She wore the mandatory uniform, but her hair was arranged and there was a slight nervous smile on her lips. Emma hesitated for a moment, partially hiding behind Michael's leg. Then, recognizing her mother, she ran in her direction. "Mommy?" Sarah knelt, embracing her daughter tightly, tears flowing freely down her face. "My love, I've missed you so much." Michael maintained a respectful distance, allowing mother and daughter to have their moment of reconnection. He observed how Emma showed Steady to Sarah, animatedly telling her about popcorn, about the new school, about her 6th birthday celebrated the previous month. Sarah listened with complete attention, asking questions, reacting with enthusiasm to her daughter's stories. From time to time she cast grateful looks at Michael, silently acknowledging how much he had done to keep Emma safe and happy. "Look what I brought for you, Mommy," said Emma, taking a folded drawing from her pocket. "It's me, you, Daddy, and popcorn, our family." Sarah looked at the colorful drawing, where 4 smiling figures held hands under a bright yellow sun. Michael noticed that unlike the previous drawing, this one showed the adult figures separated, with Emma in the middle, holding the hand of each. "It's beautiful, my love," said Sarah, her voice choked. "I'll put it on the wall of my room." The visit lasted an hour, the maximum allowed for the first time. When it came time to leave, Emma hugged her mother tightly. "We'll come back soon, right, Daddy?" she asked, looking at Michael. "Yes, Princess. We can visit Mommy twice a month." On the way back home, Emma was thoughtful, less talkative than usual. "Everything okay, Princess?" asked Michael, concerned. "Mommy seemed sad," she observed. "She misses you, but she was very happy to see you." Emma nodded, hugging Steady. "Daddy, why do people do wrong things?" The question, so simple and at the same time so profound, made Michael reflect for a moment. "Sometimes, Princess, people feel lost, confused. They make bad decisions thinking they'll solve their problems, but end up creating even bigger problems. Like when I hid the broken chocolate under the bed instead of telling the truth, and then it all got messy." Michael smiled at the comparison. "More or less like that. But for adults, the consequences can be more serious. Will Mommy learn not to do wrong things anymore?" "I hope so, Princess. She's trying." That night, after putting Emma to bed, Michael sat on the balcony with a cup of tea, reflecting on the day. The visit had gone better than expected. Emma seemed to be processing the experience in a healthy way, asking questions, expressing her emotions. His cell phone rang. It was Robert. "How did it go?" asked the lawyer without preamble. "Surprisingly well. Emma handled everything better than I expected. Children are stronger than we imagine," commented Robert. "And speaking of news, I have some updates on Sarah's case." Michael straightened in his chair, attentive. Due to her cooperation, identifying other members of Andrew's network, the judge is considering a sentence reduction. With good behavior, she may get progression to a halfway house in 18 months. The news was better than Michael had expected. It meant that Emma could have more regular contact with her mother, in a not-so-distant future. "That's good," he responded sincerely, "for Emma." "And for you?" asked Robert with the frankness of a long-time friend. Michael reflected before answering. "Sarah made serious mistakes, almost unforgivable, but she's Emma's mother, and I also made my own mistakes, in different ways." "You never abandoned her," Robert reminded. "Not physically, but emotionally." Michael paused. "I spent years thinking that being a father meant ensuring financial security, as if love could be deposited in a bank account. It took almost losing Emma to understand that she needed my presence, not my presence." Robert was silent for a moment, absorbing his friend's words. "You've changed, Michael. For the better. I had to change. For her." After hanging up, Michael walked silently to Emma's room. The girl was sleeping peacefully, steady in one arm, the other extended, as if searching for something. Popcorn was lying on the rug beside the bed, vigilant even in sleep. Michael adjusted the blanket over his daughter, lightly touching her curly hair. 6 months ago, his life was completely different. He lived for work, for the next conquest, the next $1 million contract. He measured his worth by the size of his bank account, by the respect he commanded in meeting rooms. Now he knew that his greatest achievement slept in that small bed, with a worn teddy bear and dreams that he would do everything to protect. Emma had taught him that true wealth couldn't be accounted for in financial statements. In the months that followed, they established a routine of visits to Sarah. Emma adapted well to the new family dynamic, understanding within her limitations that her parents would no longer live together, but that both loved her. The nightmares became increasingly rare until they practically disappeared. Michael continued reshaping his professional life. He sold the mansion in Washington, D.C., invested in social projects in Richmond, including a support program for children whose parents were incarcerated. In his spare time, he dedicated himself to learning things he had never had time for before, cooking simple dishes that Emma loved, playing soccer in the garden, assembling complicated puzzles on the living room floor. On a particularly significant afternoon, while helping Emma with her homework, the girl made an observation that would forever remain in his memory. "Daddy, you're different now." "Different how, princess?" he asked, curious. "Before, you were always in a hurry. You talked on the phone, looked at your watch. Now you look at me when I'm talking." The simplicity of the observation hid a depth that Michael would take weeks to fully process. It was true. Before, even when physically present, his mind was always elsewhere, worried about deadlines, contracts, meetings. "I like you better this way," Emma completed, returning to her math assignment as if she hadn't just offered one of the most important lessons Michael had ever received. That night, while Emma slept, Michael sat in his home office and began to write in a new notebook. They weren't financial spreadsheets or business strategies. It was a diary, where he recorded his reflections on the journey that had transformed him, about how he had almost lost what was most precious in his life because he was too busy accumulating things of much lesser value. "True success," he wrote on the first page, "is not measured by what we conquer, but by what we preserve, by what we protect, by the love we cultivate." Emma had taught him this in the most painful way possible, but the lesson, although late, had been learned forever.